Welcome to the Winner's Playbook with Steve and Josh. Disclaimer: the information contained in this podcast is general in nature and does not take into account your personal circumstances. Please head to the show notes if you wish to book a free 15-minute call to discuss your personal situation.
Okay, welcome back to the Winner's Playbook. My name is Steve Sloan. I'm here with my co-director, Josh Lee. Josh, we've got a bit to talk about today, but how's your week been?
We do, Steve. Yeah, busy, big week as always. Lots going on in the personal life, lots in the business. Moving homes next week, next Friday. This time next week, we've got to be out of the house, in the new house, and out of our rental within basically 48 hours, which is going to be fun and exciting. And we just passed today as well, 20 weeks, young baby coming along nicely at 20 weeks.
Great.
And it's all inching very, very close to the end now of still don't have the name, still confirming it's not going to be Steve. We're getting much closer to the end. But obviously business busy as well. End of financial year, it's always a mad dash for end of financial year super contributions. A lot of clients of ours are trying to get money into their superannuation for tax reasons, claiming it back as a tax deduction. So it's all fun and games at the moment. What about you, Steve? What's some of the highlights?
Yeah, busy, mate. We've got some acquisitions going on at the minute for the business and trying to acquire some business in Adelaide and also in Melbourne. So lots happening. And life is expensive. We've spoken a lot on these podcasts about how expensive life is and how much cash you need these days to pay for bills. And brings us to our topic of conversation for this week, and that is emergency funds. And there's a bit of a stat out there, mate, that says 47% of Australians have less than 1 month of savings, which is a pretty scary figure to even think about, especially if something goes wrong. But if we kick it off there, mate, in terms of how important it is to have that emergency fund and the ins and outs of it all, what's your take on it?
Yeah, it's obviously a pretty scary statistic. And if that is a true reflection of Australian society, that is quite scary. But I think there might be some stats in there, or segments of society might be skewing it. But nevertheless, I think there's still a lot of people out there that don't have that much money sitting in their savings and calling it an emergency fund, if we want to call it that. But how important is that to have? Well, incredibly important, because really it's there if shit ever hits the fan and you need cash to cover expenses, which could be anything from health, bailing out some family, whatever it may be in your life. Could be kids. If you don't have any of that cash to do it, well, possibly you could be jeopardizing your life nearly, in a way, if it's really that severe and you can't hand over the money to get some treatment or something like that. So no doubt having an emergency fund, incredibly important. I think it just gives you comfort and peace of mind as well, of knowing if something ever does happen or something pops up, like, you're all good. You don't have to try and put your hand out to anyone else for any sort of funds or anything like that, or go the worst case scenario where you start racking up some bad debts and taking on credit cards and start spending money essentially you don't have, because you see that every now and then happen, and that's where it gets really, really bad. But obviously incredibly important to have. You obviously don't just get that overnight either. You got to work towards building up an emergency fund, and there's definitely some strategies around it. But what about you, Steve? How have you been over your years in terms of just saving? Were you always pretty good in terms of putting some funds aside for this, or is it something you only sort of established later in life? Or
no, I was always pretty good at saving, to be honest. Even from the young age of 16, 17, I had a couple of reckless moments in your 20s, I suppose, but I've always been pretty good at saving and not really spending much. I've never really been a big spender, to be honest. I've never really done it. I've always been a save for stuff, like if it's a holiday or going overseas. Even at the age of 16, I shouted my mum a trip over to England to see her family.
Jeez, good.
Just by working in Coles, I think it was at the time. So, I've always been able to save pretty well, and I think it's simply that fact of just spending a lot less than you earn, right? That's the 101 of finance, is exactly that. People just have to do that. Doesn't matter what age you are, you just need to spend less than you earn. And if you can spend a lot less than what you earn, you build a lot of wealth. It's as simple as that. So I've always been pretty good. Cash is king. My question to you though is, would you classify an emergency fund, you've got to have liquid cash, or just access to cash?
Yeah, it's a good one. There's probably a couple of ways to address that. I think like a true emergency fund is like you have direct access, so you can get it within, say, 24 hours if you need the you need the money. And that was one of the points I was going to sort of touch on is where you're putting your emergency fund is very critical, because you don't want it to be locked up in a way that you have to wait a week to get the money out or whatever it may be. But I also don't mean that you have to have cash stashed underneath your bed either to have an emergency fund. Although there's probably people out there that do exactly that, and I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with that. It's just that money is literally sitting there, then doing nothing for you, because it's not even in a bank account generating any interest whatsoever if you're operating in that sort of a fashion. But yeah, that's probably the way I would, probably the way I would think about that side of it. The issue you get with it though is, if you don't have any cash there and you're relying on, say, your investments, like say you've got an investment portfolio, like you probably don't want to have your emergency fund sitting in an investment portfolio, because you don't want to be forced to sell down on your investments unexpectedly. And maybe those investments are sitting on capital gains and you're going to have to pay taxes associated with that. Or maybe it's a bad time in the market. Like we've seen during COVID, the markets crashed, share markets dropped, 20, 25, 30%, depending on where you are in the world or where your money is. And then if you're having to take out money at those low points, that's when you actually are going to lose on your investments. So probably not having it in an investment account, although you could, say that as like a long-term emergency savings. Ideally, you don't want to touch that bucket. So for me, it is literally simply having it in like a savings account or, offset account, redraw, depending on if if you've got a loan, obviously the offset and the redraw is going to be relevant to you. But if you don't have a loan, then that's where the savings account comes in. But what about you, Steve? Do you have any cash stashed in the backyard or anything?
Not in the backyard. No. But
Okay.
look, I think as a business owner, you naturally have to have a fairly big emergency fund, because it's not only for you personally, but also, if the business, something happens that you need to really call on. I've always made sure that we've got access to cash for that purpose as well. So I think as a business owner, I think naturally you have to sort of go that way pretty hard, right? And sure, it's not going to make you a lot of money, but it lets you sleep at night knowing that you've got cash to call on if something goes wrong. So yeah, I've got mine in a number of most of mine's in offset accounts, but I've also got a redraw facility that has access to cash if we need it. So that's important. And so look, for business owners, you probably need to make sure you've got a lot. But if you're not a business owner, mate, what do you reckon the number is that you need as an emergency fund?
Yeah, I think it'd be the way to look at that would be probably thinking something along the lines of, first of all, figure out what your cost of living is. And, if that figure is, and by cost of living, I mean, what are your bills, your day to day, and then like mortgage, rent, like things that have to be paid. So maybe that figure comes to 70,000 or 80,000 or whatever it may be. Like I would like to say at a minimum, probably 3 to 6 months of some money put aside, so that if the tap's ever turned off and the income into the household for whatever reason stops for a period of time, 1 month is probably going to be cutting it too fine. But I think if you get to a sort of period where you've got that 3 to 6 months built up, I think that does give you some breathing space where you can, think, get back on track, think about your next moves, like how you're actually going to navigate and get out of this situation. Because of course, maybe you've got some leave you can call upon with work. If you're working for someone and you're an employee, maybe you can call upon some leave and things like that, or sick leave if it is an illness that's actually sort of wiped you out. But you probably don't necessarily want to be dependent on that, because you might not have that much entitlements built up, or maybe that depletes rather quickly because you use your leave every single year. And that's probably even also worth noting of some of the importances of, how you can protect yourself besides just having an emergency savings is, some of the big things that can happen could be your health, which wipes you out for a period of time, or your partner, whatever it may be. And that's where actually having some insurance in place can come in, really great for that, from that respect. And one that I'm referring to there probably being income protection. So if that income being probably the most valuable asset you have, or is your ability to get out there and work. And if that stops for a period of time, well, everything in life really comes to a halt. And that's where income protection, which we probably haven't spoken that much about insurances on any of our podcasts. And it's obviously a piece of advice that we do provide, even though it's not the most exciting, but it is really critical about that contingency plan of if something does go wrong. Yes, you've got your emergency fund, but then you've also got the insurances there, so that, I've had clients that have, had stroke, heart attack, cancers, mental illness. And I've had, a guy I've been working with for a few years. He's been on and off work for the last couple of years due to mental illness. And fortunately, he had a great income protection policy in place. And therefore, he's been able to keep the home, the roof over his head for his family, because his wife's not earning much money, 2 young kids. And that income protection was literally the difference between him selling or them selling their home and not. So I don't think it's always just, yes, the emergency fund is great, but then also actually considering some of that protection that you can have that, does secure your income as well, I think is pretty important.
Yeah, totally. It's just access to capital, right? You just need access to capital for whatever way that comes. But yeah, absolutely. Insurance is a key priority for people, especially if you don't have a lot of capital to back you up, right?
But how do you then start to build it? Like, say someone's here listening and they're starting from scratch. Like, say they've switched jobs or whatever it may be. They've spent a bunch of cash and now they're listening and they're like, all right, guys, this sounds like a good idea, but how do I actually then go about starting to build some sort of emergency savings and have that sort of, powder there ready to go if something hits the fans? I've got some powder there that I can, throw at this thing. How would you go about doing that, Steve? If you're starting from zero, what would you be doing?
From zero, yeah. Look, I think what you said there originally was figure out what you need to start with, like how many months of income do you need? What's your expenses look like? So 3 to 6 months is your probably starting point of working that out. So work that out to start with. And then what do you need to put away per week to get there? What's your sort of time frame? Just make it that simple, right? Like, don't overcomplicate it. Just go, right, every week I've got to put X in that bank account and I cannot touch it. Stick to it. Stick to your plan and press ahead and do that. If you can do a bit more, great. The faster you get there, the better it is. But Bill, just do that. And once you get to that cap of that 3 to 6 months, then we can start investing, right? So then you can go into managed funds or ETFs or shares or whatever you want to do from there and start building actual wealth. But just keep it simple, right?
Yeah.
Simple as that. So.
Yeah, and I think like there are some really good tools online. One that I've used with some clients before is moneysmart.gov.au, like is a great website, got some great tools and calculators on there. And one I was just looking at now, just to make sure I get the name of it correct, was their savings goal calculator, where you literally put in like what balance you're starting at, which might be zero, but then what you essentially want to get to. And then it basically works back and tells you how much money you need to be putting away on whatever frequency to hit your 10, 50K or whatever it may be in that time frame, like 1 year, 2 year, and so on. So there are some really great tools that can help you figure out what that number actually is, if you're, of course, not working with a financial advisor or a professional in that realm. But what I would also then add to that is normally what I do with clients, which I've talked about plenty of times, around how people manage their cash flow. Like, the one thing you shouldn't be doing is putting all of your expenditure and you're running it all through one account. Like, if you've got all your money coming into one account and you pay everything out from there, it's very hard to try and figure out where you're going wrong and where you might be overspending or where you're not. So actually, like, segregating out where some of your money is flowing. So you've got your mortgage over here, or your rent, your bills, you've got an account for the daily spend, and then you actually start to have some transparency on where all of that money is flowing. Then you can start to see where you could maybe, first of all, cut out some unnecessary expenditure, which I think we spoke about on the last podcast, is actually looking at where all of the money is. And there's probably some easy wins there, and even maybe adjusting your lifestyle for a period of time. So you can actually start to, rather than going out for that $150, $200 dinner every week that you do with your friends, maybe you have to stop that for a period of time, but it's not going to be forever. It's just a bit of temporary pain to then get to that position where you then have that money, set up and in that emergency fund. But 100% there needs to be a cash flow system of managing that money. And I always talk about this one, because people will commonly say, like, well, Josh, there's no more I can save. Like, I only earn this and the government's out to screw me. I pay too much tax. What I like to say and get them to think about is, well, what if the government put taxes up? Because they always could, even though the tax rates are actually going to drop July 1st, which is good news for everyone, because then you're going to automatically have some more money in your pocket. But what if the government put taxes up by 10%, which who knows, could happen in the future. Tax rates can always change. What would you do? Well, you would just pay it, because you can't avoid the tax. You have to pay it. And then you would force yourself to live off less, and you would adjust your lifestyle accordingly. So what I say to people is, well, why don't you think about putting a personal tax on yourself and say whatever pay comes in, take 5 to 10% of it, shoot it off to an account that you can't touch before you get any of that money. It just goes straight off to another account. And you're putting a personal tax on yourself. It's obviously your money, but again, if the government put taxes up, you would just cop it and you would move on and live still, and you'd make it work. You'd probably kick and scream a little bit, but you would make it happen. So, if you apply that same principle in your own life, it's a great way of doing it. And I've also seen a couple of clients do this themselves, where they actually get their employer to withhold more tax from their pay as a way of forced savings as well. So I have seen that from time to time, because it's more about that psychological piece of, they don't see the money. It more gets withheld from their pay, and then when they go to do their tax return, they'll get all of that extra tax back from lodging their tax return. So there's a lot of different ways of building it. But I don't know.
So just on that though, and so when's a good time to use the emergency fund? Like, what's it actually for?
Yeah. Like probably health is probably the big one there. Yeah. Health is a big one. I literally just got off a call with some clients, and we were talking about the cash flow system, and then they're sort of worried about, like, we're about to move house and they're having a baby, much like myself, like a pretty similar situation. So there are some abnormally high expenses for a period of time. And that's just kind of where your emergency fund kicks in. Like if you need I don't know, the washing machine blows up. I don't know, do washing machines blow up? Maybe, I don't know. Maybe they do. If they, that blows up, car breaks down, stuff needs to be fixed with the car, like things that have to be sort of addressed. And an emergency fund is not, we want to go to Bali in 2 weeks sporadically and pull out the emergency fund for that. That's probably not something I would classify as an emergency fund category. But what about you, Steve? Have you actually had situations where you've had to sort of pull the lever and tap into the emergency fund over the years, or?
Look, there has been, like, for one-off big expenses that came out of the blue, like I've had to spend, like, a prime example, cars blowing up, or things like that. So that they're just out of the blue, and that's what it's always been good for. Fortunate, touch wood, I've never had a health condition that stopped me from working, so that's always positive. But I think everyone at some stage will always call on it, because there's always stuff that happens in life that you just don't expect to happen, right? And it's there for the emergency fund is there for the essentials. That's what I'd say. So it's not the whole, as you said, it's not the holidays, all that sort of stuff. It's for food, transport, all the stuff that you need to just run your life and continue. That's what's there for the unexpected, right? So that's all I'd say to that.
Yeah, and so then what if we finish on if people out there have mortgages, because that's where you have some other options in terms of maybe where you house that money. Like if we touch on like difference between offset, redraw, or savings, or even a lot of people get confused between an offset and a redraw and don't really understand the differences of actually putting money in that redraw, and then pulling it out means you're kind of borrowing again from the bank when you pull that money back out of the redraw. But what are some of the key things there, Steve, of differences between those three: offset, redraw, and savings, and where you put money?
Offset is, I suppose it's your money. That's the starting point. So the offset is your money. Redraw, it depends on how you structured it, but generally it's not your money. You're just redrawing from the bank. But look, I think at the end of the day, as long as you've got access to capital, especially as you go down the track and you've got multiple assets or houses or investment properties and things like that, you can play around with this a fair bit. It doesn't need to be set in stone. And I think, as long, end of the day, if you've built up a bit of wealth and you've got a couple of properties, etc., or whatever it may be, as long as you've got access to capital, then that's okay. Whether it's redraw, offsets, a line of credit from the bank, whatever that may be, that's the key part, because you just need a certain chunk of cash to get you past that 3 to 6 months, and then you're back on track again, right? So it doesn't have to be a sort of a real set rule, I don't think, this one, as long as we got the access to the cash.
Yeah, I think it's a great point, because that money is not there. It's not the main investment vehicle. So, yes, you do want to probably have it housed in the most optimal manner, but that's not the purpose of it. The purpose is not to get the best interest rate or anything like that. Like, the purpose is just to have readily accessible access to that money whenever you ultimately need to. But of course, if you have an offset account and you've got a high interest rate, you might want to just stick it in the offset account, as opposed to a redraw, because I know some of my loans, if I try to take money out of the redraw, I should get charged if I pull them out. So it's worthy of obviously noting and understanding that with your bank. But we'll finish up there, guys. And as always, if you are getting value out of the podcast, please continue to follow along. Give us 5 stars on Spotify and Apple. And we do a newsletter. We put out a couple of posts every week as well. So if you want to tag along with that, that will be in the show notes. You can join into Steve's newsletter. Follow along with all of our social medias as well, guys. We are across all of our advisors in the business. There's about 5 of us that actually post every single week on pretty much on a daily basis across the board. So if you can't get enough of the podcast, please do follow along all of the social medias, TikTok, LinkedIn, Instagram. We've even got some of the one of our advisors actually is Chinese and gets on the social media for the I forget the name of them. I think
WeChat.
it's Little Red.
Is it WeChat?
WeChat or Red Pocket or Red something.
Yeah.
See, we're gonna get in shit for saying that now because we've got the names wrong. But we're kind of across all the social medias, guys. And if you, of course, want to chat with any of the advisors at any point in time, if you just jump on the website, you can, of course, come through for a 15-minute chat, and we can just chat about your situation and where you might possibly need some help, or if not, at least point you in the right direction. So, Steve, thanks for that, and I'll see you on the next one, mate.
Great chat. See you, mate. Bye.
Cheers.